Welcome to Chapter 3, Grouping with Pivot Tables. In this chapter, we're going to do the same grouping and aggregation that we did in the previous chapter, but present the data in something called a pivot table. So the values will be the same, it's just the presentation will look different. So pivot tables are something commonly seen in Microsoft Excel. This is one example over here in Pandas that we will recreate below. So how do you create a simple pivot table? There are 4 components. Again, it uses the same terminology of the grouping aggregation that we saw in the last chapter. So there are 4 components. You can have one vertical grouping column, one horizontal grouping column. So there's 2 grouping columns, as you can see over here, race and sex. So here's the vertical column, and these are the unique values of race. These are the unique values of sex. There's going to be one aggregating column. So here we're going to aggregate salary. And how are we going to aggregate? Well, we're going to give it an aggregating function over here, which is just say like the mean. And so this table represents the mean salaries by race and sex. All right, so let's go ahead and create this over here in Pandas. So there is a pivot table method, and the way it works is that there's 4 parameters that you're gonna set: index, columns, values, and agfunc. So index is the vertical grouping column. So over here, we're gonna grouping by race. And then columns, we're gonna group by sex. And then values, we set to the aggregating column, which will be, in this case, salary. What do we wanna aggregate? And then the agfunc will be the aggregating function. So here is, we'll just take the mean. And so here we get that same pivot table. All we need to do is round this. We'll round it to nearest 1,000, and we should get the same result as we did above there. So this is a this is a pivot table in Pandas. It does the exact same thing as a group by aggregation, but just presents the data in a different manner. So it's easier to do comparisons when you create a pivot table, right? You can compare the male and female salaries a lot easier, like which one is more or less. You can compare salaries by race easier, just because the way it is displayed like this. You'll notice that Pandas nicely will sort the index and the columns in alphabetical order for you. So it's important to know that pivot tables and group by aggregations are essentially the same thing. So I want to do this same exact thing, but use a group by aggregation. So I'm going to say group by, and these are my grouping columns: race and sex, like this. So I'm going to group by this and call the ag method, and I'm going to say mean salary equals, and I'd say pass in a tuple over here. So that's how you do that. So you should see that the values over here are the same. It's just the display that is different. So we're still grouping by the unique combinations of race and sex. The aggregating column is salary, and the aggregating function is still the mean. We get the exact same result. It's just that we have pivoted the sex column over here. So now it makes a nice 2-column table instead of this longer data. So I tend to like to use pivot tables it's just easier to make comparisons. They're better as like a final result or a final product. We typically, I'll talk more about wide versus long data in the tidy data part of this course. But so wide data essentially is wider across your screen. So a pivot table creates this wider data. It's a little bit easier to just read as a human being. It's better for presentations. Longer data, like what is returned from a group by, is actually easier to do further processing. So if you want to do further processing, you typically leave it as long data. You use a group by. For presentation, you use a pivot table, which is wide data, but there's a lot more to this wide versus long data, but that's sufficient for now. Pivot tables actually have a default aggregation, which is the mean. So you don't have to say agfunc equals mean, but I almost always suggest you do that, to actually write it out just so that we know what we're aggregating. Don't just assume it is the mean. And then all the other string variables are available to pivot tables. So let's just go down here. I'm going to copy and paste this, and I'll change the aggregation. I can say, all right, I want the max salary for each one of these groups, the min salary. You just get the size of the groups. This one you don't want to round. We could count. So there are missing values here. So this will give you all the non-missing salary values. You can even get the IDX max. Anything that is an aggregation will work here, right? This just tells you where the location of that, Asian female is with the largest salary is in this position. And unique, right? The number of unique salaries. You could even change this to, say, title, like how many unique titles are there in each, of these groups over here. All right, so hopefully that is a good introduction into the pivot tables and proves to you that the results are the same thing as a group by. You'll notice that this is just one function, so it's no longer a two-step process. You do all, you say the grouping and aggregation all in one place. You don't break it up into a two-step process like group by. So that's a little bit nicer. It's just this one method that you have to know instead of a group by and then an ag method, chain to it.